Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-Commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. And I have an incredible next guest for you. But before I make the introduction of our guest, I would love to encourage you, wherever you are listening to or watching this episode, please share it with one other person that you think would benefit from our content. We have over 535 episodes and an extensive back catalog of topics for you to listen to and watch. We rely on you to get the word out about our incredible content from our incredible guests. But without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Bryan House, the CEO of Elastic Path, to the podcast. Welcome, Bryan.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
It is awesome to have you along for the ride with me today. You were saying that you've got some big plans for this weekend in Upton, Mass, where you are based. But we won't talk too much about that because that's personal life, and it's nice to be able to rush into the weekend after a long week of getting it done in the e-commerce community. But before we start talking about Elastic Path, and most of my audience will probably know and have heard the name Elastic Path, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we do, why don't you tell me and the audience how you came to be in the wonderful world of e-commerce in the first place?
Sure. So happy to. I've always been a sort of entrepreneur and very much focused on early stage startups. In a previous life, I brewed beer professionally. So I was within the early days of the craft beer movement, did that for 8 years and actually have a degree in brewing. Still a big fan of beer. But I moved into tech and have been really focused on early stage companies. I was one of the founding team members at Acquia and helped grow that. I was employee 6 there and grew that, was there up to well over 800 people and well over 150 million in revenue. They called Neural Magic, that was actually founded by an MIT professor and one of his postdocs. That actually company was just acquired by Red Hat last year. It was a great run in the AI space. But I joined Elastic Path about 5 years ago. And really, based on my experience at Acquia and some of the companies I've been at before, and with a really good understanding of digital experience and sort of web infrastructure and commerce, the role commerce plays in that, I actually was an investor in a small company called Molten that was acquired by Elastic Path to power our multi-tenant cloud offering. And I knew the CEO well, and he commandeered me. And so I came in to run product, took over customer success, and then really all customer facing operations before I moved into my most recent role there. It's been a long time working with customers, being on the SaaS vendor side, and e-commerce played an important role throughout that career.
Wow, what an exciting journey to get to where you are today. And I always think it's super interesting to hear the background of how people got into commerce, because in my experience, most people, they didn't necessarily train in commerce. They didn't necessarily go to school for it or university for it. They fell into commerce. And that's certainly true of me and most of my contemporaries that have been in commerce for more than 10, 15, 20 years. We all landed in this beautiful industry through various different vectors. There's no common path for all of us to get into this industry. So it's super interesting. In a former life, I was heavily involved in the hospitality industry and running restaurants before I got into commerce 25 years ago. So it's a wonderful melting pot of people and backgrounds and interests. And I always like to say, anybody considering a life in commerce, that there's something for everyone in this industry, whether you're a creative, whether you're a designer, whether you're into analytics and data. It doesn't really matter what you're into. There's a home for you in commerce because there's just so much work to be done.
There's definitely a lot of work to be done. Yeah, it's become synonymous with digital in the ways like social media has as well. And I think, I get excited about the pace at which digital moves, and my bias is towards the new. And so part of being involved in sort of digital experiences and front ends and what have you is that very much plays to sort of the things that get me jazzed in the morning, if you will. The commerce market has certainly delivered that. It's interesting. Some people that know me know that there was a time in my life where I was a commerce skeptic, and that was really about should content management companies own commerce companies? But I've certainly come around and see where the intersection is. most of my skepticism was those are two different functions within your buyer organization. You didn't gain any leverage on either side. And certainly think we've seen that in the market with some of the people that did pursue that strategy. I don't think it really turned into be much of a multiplier, but it's being focused on commerce has been really interesting. Really thinking about what the future of commerce is what sort of gets me excited these days.
No question. I still get excited every single day to get up to do what I do. I can't actually imagine doing anything else, and hopefully, I get to do it for many more years to come and hopefully play a supporting role in this incredible industry we call commerce. But as we start to get into Elastic Path, what it is, what it does, as I said, most people will have at least heard the name Elastic Path, even if they don't know that it's an e-commerce platform. And you serve multiple different verticals, multiple different categories, multiple different business models, but certainly have over the last few years doubled and tripled down on the B2B side of commerce, which is
Mhm.
really exciting to see because those are the most complex use cases in commerce today, is certainly servicing the B2B market. And at least as far as I know, I think this is the 25th year anniversary of Elastic Path this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it is correct. Yes, it's amazing to think about that. From given my career in tech, most tech companies don't last 25 years; they get acquired and move on. So the fact that Elastic Path has survived that long is a tribute to the founder Harry Temko and the team there. I will say the experience here has been interesting in that there's more sort of long-term tenured employees here than any other tech company I've ever worked at. We give people smoking jackets with their 5, 10, and 15-year anniversaries. And there's a lot of smoking jacket wearers in this company, which is fascinating.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, it's certainly Elastic Path. It came into being just as I was coming into the commerce industry. So yeah, platform, because when I first came into the commerce industry, OS commerce was a thing. Magento really wasn't around yet. And so there was a lot of bespoke e-commerce platforms being built at the time. There were a lot of bespoke commerce experiences. The first agency I ever worked at was building a lot of custom websites from the ground up for commerce. There was a lot of Flash websites being built. There was a
Yep.
lot of frame-based e-commerce
Yep.
websites being built, which broke the whole concept of the URL. And we rapidly figured that out, that building in frames wasn't such a great idea because you couldn't
Right.
send people to specific deep links on a website. Or if you did, you lost the navigation structure because that was in the side frame. And wow, it's been a wild ride in this industry over the last 25 years. But man, it has been super exciting. Why don't you tell us what the vision, because presumably you've become good friends with the founders and leaders of Elastic Path over the years. What do you think, from your perspective, was the vision for the platform from day one as it relates to the competitive landscape of the time? Because obviously the reason for it to come into being is not necessarily the reason why the platform has evolved the way that it has. But I think understanding some of the founding ethos of these platforms is really important because it gives us an inside skinny on kind of the evolution of commerce as a whole, but the role that platforms play in it.
Sure. I think Elastic Path is similar to a lot of companies in that era where they started out as services companies, right? Because the internet and the web was so new and they were just solving problems for customers and doing interesting projects. And I think the sort of inflection moment for Elastic Path was actually the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. They actually won, the company, which was based in Vancouver, won the rights to run the store for the Vancouver Olympics. And so, in effect, what they had to do was build a platform that they had to then go operate in short term in nature. But that became the sort of founding lodestone, if you will, of the company. And it was interesting because I was at Acquia at the time. And what we saw happening in the CMS market was people were transitioning from every SI could build you a CMS. Building a CMS isn't hard. But what happens is that you bought the SIs at CMS, you were in bed with that SI for eternity until you replaced it. And so open source was one path that people went in to create some flexibility and some optionality. And Elastic Path did something similar with Elastic Path, what we call self-managed commerce now. They built a platform. They gave you incredible flexibility. They made the source code accessible to our customers. And they really was the ethos with how do we solve some of the most complicated commerce problems out there. So it was one of the early adopters of headless systems, right? And focusing on APIs and the power to give flexibility to developers to build the right commerce system to meet unique requirements. And we see that in our customers, people like T-Mobile and Serena and Lilly, they're all have unique requirements that aren't in an out of the box solution. And so they love the flexibility and the freedom to meet their requirements with a platform that was also that customers described as military grade stability. And that's a huge selling point for customers that are processing millions, tens of millions, or even billions of dollars through a platform. They want to know that is going to be rock solid at all times. And that's certainly been part of our reputation as well on some of the biggest selling days that organizations have. So that's really been the foundation of it. And then about 5-6 years ago, they faced an inflection point because self-managed commerce, in the name, it's an on-prem solution. You have to do that. And the market's moved to, I don't really want to manage my commerce infrastructure. I may or may not have expertise in Kubernetes and data infrastructure and IO and networking.
X and all the other technologies that you need to self-host, and going back to the bad old days of Magento.
Exactly. And that's not a core competency that creates competitive differentiation for everyone. And so what we've seen is certainly the market shift there. And Elastic Path faced a sort of an interesting decision point where we could refactor our existing platform to make it multi-tenant SaaS and run it that way, or we could acquire a multi-tenant SaaS company. And so they acquired a company, Molten, to pursue that rather than refactor their existing platform, which other companies did. And that's actually, I think, proven to be a really good decision for us because we've got tremendous customers on our self-managed, and that's the right solution for them for either performance, scale, stability, or compliance reasons. And then we've got a multi-tenant SaaS that is built on all the lessons that we learned from self-managed and built it in an environment that's much more accessible and aligned with sort of modern development practices is where the market wants to go. And so we've got great customers on both of those. And we see a ton of innovation on both of those, but it's really, there's a lot of synergy in terms of how we share information and learning and increasingly code across the two of those to solve code.
Wow. I wasn't actually aware. That's such an interesting story because I wasn't actually aware that there was a point where Elastic Path diverged and there was effectively two separate platforms. That starts to get pretty complex and pretty expensive, pretty fast, maintaining two separate code bases, two completely different, presumably languages, programming languages, two different infrastructure configurations. And obviously a code base that's designed for true multi-tenant SaaS is a very different architecture than something that's designed for on-prem. That's such an interesting decision that the company made because from a maintenance perspective, obviously there's a heavier lift there than making a complete rebuild of the code base from the ground up for multi-tenant SaaS deployment. Super interesting. And do you think that as you move forward and as your customers move forward, are you seeing just slowly more and more attrition on the on-prem side of the business and more acceptance and in fact demand for the SaaS version of the platform?
I think I wouldn't want to overstate the gaps between them, right? Because we organize our engineering the way that every organization runs, right? You develop a squad model and you have squads working on different things, right? So we have a squad that works on self-managed and we have squads that work on our multi-tenant SaaS. So I don't think that's a significant issue. And we have operations teams that work across both of those platforms. And so there's a lot of learning and sharing that goes on. I don't think we should overstate the point of complexity and what have you. I'd say, one of the things that's super interesting about commerce in general, and certainly with our self-managed platform, is once you find a platform that works for you and solves your business needs, people become incredibly sticky and they have no desire to move. And this is the post-COVID challenge of the commerce market in general, is nobody really wants to go through a re-platform project. And so what we have is a set of customers in our self-managed for which that is the right platform for them. Whatever requirements they had, unique needs that they want a self-managed solution, right? You can do GitLab self-managed or multi-tenant SaaS, right? You can do lots of products like that. We meet their needs. There's a core group of products. I will say from a new prospect point of view and people embarking on new commerce projects, I think demand for self-managed solutions is a lot less. And the expectations of the market in general have changed to more multi-tenant SaaS solutions, and that's totally fine. And I think each company comes up with its own ways to address that. But there's certainly, we believe we have two really strong product lines that are well adapted to meet the unique requirements of the customers in each.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. And why kill off a product if it's still popular with a certain segment of your customer base? Doesn't make sense to do that unless the overhead and the cost to do so become prohibitive, and it just doesn't make sense anymore at some
Well,
point.
yeah, and I think that also goes against our ethos of sort of customer success. I'm a huge believer, and we invest a tremendous amount in customer success and overall across organizations. I think one of the things you get in situations like this in the past is forced migrations or in the mandates from a company. See this in acquiring situations all the time. And we've avoided that because what we care about is ARR driven business is long-term customer relationships, right? So we invest a tremendous amount in that rather than short-term thinking that says, oh, you must be on our new platform because we just bought our new platform thing.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And this Elastic Path is, at least as far as I know, and in all transparency, I've never worked with the Elastic Path platform. I never architected on it. I've never built a site on it. So I have to go by what's on the tin, and knowing the history of the platform over the last long period of time of being in the industry and hearing lots of stories about the platform. It didn't start out as a B2B focused platform. It
Oh,
started out very much as a consumer facing platform. It started out as a B2C and D2C focused platform. And you guys, maybe saying you got B2B religion is too strong of a term, but certainly laterally to the business, B2B became much, much more of a focus pillar for the
yeah.
business than it ever was historically. At what point did you see the market moving in the direction of B2B? At what point did you guys say to yourself, look, this is a very fast moving, fast growing opportunity that we need to participate in? If we look at the B2C and D2C space, Shopify's largely won that war. Are they in every single deployment? No. But, if we look at net new, either migrations in the B2C or D2C world or net new brands coming into commerce for the first time, the lion's share of those are going onto the Shopify platform. And that's just the reality of the consolidation of B2C and D2C. B2B is not like that yet. There's
Well,
no clear winner yet. There's a battle of 30 plus major B2B focused e-commerce platforms out there. It's an absolute dogfight out there for business in the B2B world. And there's a lot more greenfields opportunities in the B2B world because the B2B world is 5 to 10 years behind its B2C and D2C counterparts. And so there's a lot more net new implementations happening in the B2B world as a result, depending on the vertical and whether you're talking about a manufacturer or distributor, somewhere around 60% ish of manufacturers and distributors offer some form of e-commerce today.
mhm.
Now that statistic also includes EDI and punch out. The reality is that there's a lot, and I'm talking a significant chunk of the B2B world that still does not offer self-service e-commerce in any kind of meaningful way. And so there's so many more greenfields opportunities in the B2B world versus the B2C and D2C world, where most of the work in the B2C and D2C world are replatform projects. And so
Yep.
you've got to win that away from another platform usually. And so at what point did Elastic Path realize the B2B opportunity and said, hey, we want to really pursue this with gusto, which means we're going to have to bring some new functionality to the platform to support those business models?
Sure. Yeah. I got here years ago. At the time, there was a significant sort of mindset that we're going after B2B. But one of the things that's funny, they did an analysis of our pipeline, recent pipeline is future forecast pipeline, and we had no B2B offers in it. And this was at the height of COVID when everyone was moving in as fast as they could into commerce. And what's interesting is that was all B2C. And so I put a pause on some of the aspirational product roadmap around that. We had some core features and we're building towards it. I remember I drew this drawing. It was like a timeline with a unicorn at the end. I'm like, this is what B2B looks like from our product roadmap. And it's 5 years away. We need to be selling deals now. And so we some long bets to build some capabilities that would enable us to win on the B2C side, but also gave us optionality in the future. We did this around accounts and customers. And really with our product catalog, we have a capability called Product Experience Manager, where we took just what is probably the longest legacy piece of the e-commerce sort of technology stack And we broke it down and applied microservice principles, right? We broke it down into separate microservices for products, for price books, and for organization of the catalog. So that way you unlocked all these combinatorial advantages and options within a catalog without having to create duplicate catalogs or create all these sort of expensive workarounds, if you will. And so what's interesting is that helped us in the short term in the B2C market. So a good example of this is we have a customer, Serena and Lily, who's in the custom furniture experience market. And they wanted to recreate their design experience online. But when you go to buy a couch from Serena and Lily, you could have upwards of 1,500 options in terms of configuring that couch. But a typical e-commerce system, they were on Salesforce before, gave you 200 variations, right? So they could not
Yes.
even anywhere replicate that experience. And so with our PXM capability, we enabled them to have effectively unlimited variations on that so they could present what the real options were and recreate that sort of in-store design experience. But then we also enabled out of the box bundling, effectively configuration management to assemble those pieces into configurations that were most likely to drive purchases and more popular configurations, all that out of the box. And so that helps us land customers like them. But along the way, we were also gave us the flexibility to compete more effectively in the B2B space. And then just in the last couple of years, we've really pivoted and say, because for all the reasons you described, the B2B market is where opportunity lies. And we're definitively the last couple of years have been in this post-COVID hangover, if you will, where everyone bought a ton of software in 21 and 22 to go into e-commerce. And now they're still working through their amortization of that capital expenditure around this the last couple of years. So there's been no appetite for replatforms or digital transformation projects and for big pieces. And so we've looked at B2B and say, just as you described, there's greenfield opportunity. There are businesses that didn't rush in during COVID to go digital. Now they're come in and consider it, right? And they're a little bit in the sort of Jeffrey Moore world. Maybe they're late majority adopters, but they are now coming to market, right? And then, of course, all the sort of mocked blow up over the last couple of months. And I think that was always one of the questions in that market as they considered the leading technologies in the space is like, what's the right solution for a B2B buyer for our business processes? Now we feel really confident through things like our PXM capabilities, some of our account management hierarchy pieces. We have a capability we call organizations for B2B2C models that works really well for distributors to enable you to have one catalog at the organization and then that out to many digital storefronts. And that's actually worked really well. And so we're now targeting the B2B space really aggressively because we knew we were doing the foundational work there. And really now you add AI into this and you solve some of the big problems that I think a lot of B2B companies it kept them on the sidelines. Like they don't want to do big integration projects. They don't want to do big digital transformations, right? I don't want to spend $2 million on a 12-month e-commerce project. I think the dynamics, those fundamental dynamics of the market are really shifting and we're seeing a lot more interest and sort of signs of light in that market than we have been in D2C for sure.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys do take a modular monolith or a suite-based approach to the platform development these days. And
Yeah.
I think, as you referenced, I had Mariano from VTEX on the podcast recently, and we were talking about kind of the implosion, for lack of a better term, of some of the elements of the Mock Alliance and the coming to the end of the ZERP era forced businesses to
100%.
relook at their technical architecture. And it wasn't just from a commerce perspective, it was from every element of IT spend across an entire organization. And where during ZERP, many organizations were spending upwards of 8% on their total IT budget. And that just, once ZERP came to an end, that was totally unsustainable. And so all these businesses started to rationalize their tech stack, both their operational behind the scenes tech stack, but also their customer facing tech stack. And they started to say, geez, maybe this whole compose every single component, best of breed, absolutely everything, tie it together with an iPaaS system. Maybe that's not really that sustainable. Maybe the idea is good in theory, but in practice, it brings a level of cost, complexity, implementation timelines, flexibility that's just not viable, and it concentrates risk with our partners because of the fact that we have an element of lock-in and dependence on our partners
Exactly.
to continue to deliver on that composable promise. And so where the market sits today, as I see it, and I was never a fan of headless in any meaningful way. I railed against headless actually from day one when headless started to reach the mainstream. And my argument was headless is only appropriate for a tiny, minuscule fraction of the market. But the rest of the market, it makes zero sense, both technically and from a commercial perspective, makes zero sense for most businesses out there. Obviously, it's a different story if you're headless on your own stack, meaning that there's a lot of platforms out there that are internally headless and they are pre-composed and pre-integrated by their own internal APIs. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that's where ultimately the entire world goes eventually by default anyway, because the reality is that everybody needs APIs to connect to. That's the simple reality of the market. And I think most modern business platforms are API first platforms. So that makes sense, right?
Exactly.
But that's more of an efficiency and architecture thing as opposed to, oh, hey, this is going to make my customer experience 1,000% better because we're an API first architecture. So I think that the world has come around to this idea, or it's returned to its senses, is what I would say. It's come to its senses and it's okay. Most brands today, whether we're talking B2B, B2C, DTC, doesn't really matter, most buyers of technology are expecting individual solutions to do a lot more in that one solution than ever before. And they're expecting that one solution to tick many more boxes than ever before. And so that they get more bang for their buck and they don't have to go out and buy a CDP. So they don't have to go out and buy a PIM. So that they don't have to go out and buy an OMS. So they don't have to go out and buy these 10 different components across the stack and then try to tie it all together through some form of middleware. Is that the changing sentiment that you are also witnessing in the market and that you're orientating your platform around that change in thinking or change in expectation by the market?
A couple of things there. I certainly think that markets are always a pendulum, right? And so there was a period of time when it was all monolithic and everything was tightly coupled and you wanted all things from one vendor. And then it shifted way over to composable. And as you described, it became like a religious fervor, if you will. And you had to buy everything separately. Um, do I see that shifting back to the middle? Do I want more from my vendor? Yes, but I want more from my vendor with the optionality that I don't have to buy it from you. Because the problem with monolithic architectures was you had a couple of features that were first class and lots of features that were third class. And you had to live with the third class features if the first class features were important enough. The beauty of composable was you could pick and choose which features were important and drove competitive advantage for your business and then invest in those. And like we're launching a search service because not everybody wants to buy a third party search tool that requires a ton of configuration just to generate product landing pages.
Yes.
And it's a great example of where AI is actually changing the dynamics of this business because our ability to create that now is dramatically different than it was a few years ago, where you felt like, well, why am I rebuilding Algolia or Conductor or Coveo? It doesn't make any sense. You could just go buy that. But now I can do it so cheaply. It's going to work. If you want best of breed, there's plenty of best of breed options. This gets you up and running and is just enough at the right price to deliver, to meet your business requirements. And I do think it's funny. I have long history working with the analysts, and I think that this is a funny game that we play is they demand on their way there sort of market magic quadrants and waves work that you have to be best of breed in all these things. And in order to score well, to use as a marketing asset, I don't think that's the reality of how people buy commerce software, right? And they tend to be so broad that they're trying to be all things to all people when, people's requirements doesn't matter whether there's 100 lines in their RFP or 5 lines. There's 3 things that really matter. Can you solve those 3 problems? That's what's important. And then, so I think that's a big piece. One of the things the decisions that I made when I ran product a few years ago was we have a platform that are multi-tenant SaaS and we have lots of services, but they're all architected independently. And we went and said, hey, what the changing dynamic in the market wasn't that I want a fully composable solution or I want a tightly coupled monolithic solution. Was I don't want to do digital re-platforms. I don't want to do transformation projects. Like I don't have the time, energy, or the risk appetite to take on these, right? Those are career limiting projects. You do it and it works great. Hey, we got a new technology. You do it and it goes poorly, you get fired, right? Who's going to take that decision? And so we broke down our product into independent services and make them purchasable as an independent service. So we have customers that just used our PXM capability. We have customers that just use our cart and checkout capability, right? Because what it does is it narrows the scope of the problem, reduces risk, and it's a little bit of a let's get to know each other before we develop a 10-year relationship together, right? And that has actually proven to be really positive for us because we excel at customer success. That's our number one core value that we talk about with customers and inside the company. And so they see that and they get to live that with that. And so that leads on to follow on projects. But the other thing that we realized when we started selling like that is the goal is not to be best of breed in 8 product categories. The goal is to
It's
have a
impossible
great
anyway.
commerce. Exactly. You have a great commerce platform and then change the implementation dynamics such that you can try before you buy or bite off smaller chunks so you can manage the risk and then rethink that. We call this unplatforming is 100% an implementation strategy, not a product strategy. And so that has actually worked really well. And it's changed the dynamics of how we have conversations with prospects and people that are considering e-commerce platform projects. Because we did a survey recently, we called it our digital commerce landscape surveys. And some 90% of people are struggling with limitations with their existing platform. But the pain game formula to change that platform is really out of whack. And so there's no way that they're going to go and say, look, let's wipe all this out and start over. No, people just aren't doing that.
And I think what you have just said speaks to something that Mariano mentioned when I interviewed him, which is he said, now more than ever, it's more important for your platform to be decomposable than composable. And what he meant by
Oh,
that was he's saying, sure, it's all fine and good to be composable, but if you so tightly build your suite-based platform with interdependencies on it. So just to use your example of search, if search is so tightly coupled with catalog management, which is so tightly coupled with PIM, which is so tightly coupled with OMS, that you remove any one of those modules or turn off or disable any one of those modules
100%.
and the rest of the system ceases to function as a result, then you are no longer a decomposable platform. And so what I'm seeing in a lot of my consulting work is, okay, cool. We want to stand up this stack, right?
Mhm.
Where 8 out of the 10 boxes are provided by the commerce vendor. But if at some point in the future we do decide to disable that search merchant personalization component of the platform and implement something that's best of breed, is that going to break the rest of the stack?
Exactly.
And you want the answer to that to be no, that you
Right.
can decompose certain elements of that. Or if, let's say, hypothetically, you offer a great OMS as part of your platform, but somebody decides to disable OMS and they decide to either use the OMS of their ERP or they decide to implement something like a Pipe 17 or some sort of third-party OMS standalone system, is that going to break the rest of the platform? And so I think this idea of decomposability within the suite-based modular monolith, as it's the term I like to use, that which is really what it is. It's a modular
Yeah.
monolith, and they're tightly pre-composed, meaning that they work well together. They're pre-integrated. You don't need an iPaaS to make all these components of the stack work together. And that to me feels like a sustainable direction for the market to go in.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think honestly, I think it goes a little bit back to your comments previously about headless. I think one of the things that I think we learned from headless is having a tightly coupled front end and back end actually just impose constraints. And so people said, hey, I want those to be loosely coupled, right? And they have an SDK, consume my APIs, but don't tightly couple that. That same exact same principle applies in all the services. And we've been doing that for years. Have been selling it such that because we understand that if you architect this correctly, and kudos to Amazon for doing this that before anyone in the market, is these should snap together and build on one another, but aren't dependent on one another. And so that's a philosophy that I brought in here. We made really throughout our entire product line in order to ensure that we're making it easy for customers to really think about this from like a future proof point. Because at the end of the day, commerce systems are 10-year life cycles within accounts, within customers. And so they're like, am I going to be able to live with this for 10 years? And honestly, I think one of the interesting dynamics to watch over the next few years is that dynamic for all those people that move from Salesforce to Shopify, right? Because Shopify is a phenomenal fintech company, but I don't really think they're a software company. they
Yep.
subsidize software with payments,
Totally.
and everybody loves how cheap it is because they're already paying for payments anyway. But that when that starts to really impose limitations, like we see it in B2B and other places, that's what I think we're going to start to see. This thing really is as inexpensive as it feels.
Yeah, and does it imply, by definition, certain elements of tech debt because of the level of
Mhm.
customization that you need to do for certain use cases? And does it make sense to simply look at an alternate platform instead that
Yeah.
doesn't engender significant tech debt? For you guys, in terms of net new business, what
Mhm.
percentage of net new business today, roughly, I mean, you don't have to give me exact numbers, is B2B versus, say, B2C and D2C brands? Is it like heavily weighted towards B2B now, where you 70% of your net new business is coming from the B2B world, manufacturers and distributors? What does that composition and makeup look like for you now?
Yeah. So our ICP that we really been focused on for the last couple of years has been manufacturers and distributors. So we've been pivoting that way for a while, but I'd say it's probably 2/3, 1/3 B2B to B2C. And I think it's for the dynamics we talked about. I think certainly B2C has all gone to Shopify, and that's a really compelling offering there. And they've won in that space. But also the characteristics of B2B brands they need flexibility, and they have more complexity in general. And so they're looking for platforms that meet those needs. And so that really aligns well with what our value proposition and what we bring to the table from a solution point of view. So it's probably 2/3 in the B2B category these days.
I mean, that, I guess, validates your investment in that world. And I guess it validates continuing investment in that world. And from your lens and from your perspective and your background, what do you think are maybe the one, two, three serious differentiators for Elastic Path in that manufacturer distributor world that really set you guys apart and that you think are really a pillar of your go-to-market play that you say, hey, we're planting this flag or these two or three flags in the sand that we think give us an edge over most of our competitors, that when we come to the table and we've got maybe one, two, three other shortlisted platforms that we find ourselves coming up against over and over again in the market, where are some of the areas that you're finding success and winning opportunities with your clients because of the way that you've built your platform?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that stand out. So first, as I mentioned, PXM and sort of the sort of combinatorial sort of flexibility that PXM provides, Product Experience Manager, for B2B use cases has been incredible, right? So whether we have customers that sell just the Caterpillar wheels for a heavy equipment manufacturer, right? Like complex product catalogs, lots of details, in the need to maintain relationships between those products. We do all of that out of the box really well. We add in bundles and sort of configuration assemblies. Effectively, those are all things that we do exceptionally well.
Almost
Second
like a
thing is
bomb, almost like an ERP bomb like approach, but in the commerce platform to catalog management.
exactly right. You can tie it into your ERP, you can tie it into a PIM if you have those. If your product catalog doesn't need those and you don't want those, you can manage all that in Elastic Path. Like one example we've done is you can have one set of products, and you can have thousands of price books, right? So if you have contract negotiated pricing with 1,000 customers, you can have those in there, and as publishes as one catalog, but when they log in, they see their correct price book, right?
Of
That's
course.
rather than duplicating that or managing it outside their commerce platform. We also do really well in dynamic pricing scenarios. We have some customers that have a third-party product pricing engine, like we have customers that price based on zip code and things. And so we can handle that exceptionally well, very elegantly with our solution. One thing that we did a couple of years ago is we built in a subscription engine. Typically, if you have some combination of both one-time purchase products and recurring subscription products, you have to run two commerce systems, right? Side
Yes.
by side. And you can't run the same transaction. So like in the manufacturing setting, if you sell a product that has a service warranty or a service contract, you'd have to have run two different things, or you'd manage that transaction outside that. We can do all of that outside, all in our system out of the box. One of the things we're starting to see a lot is for people that are doing digital products, that we make that very easy to manage those in our product catalog, and through those end up being a combination of one-time and subscription purchases. So that works out really well. And then one area that we're starting to see a lot of interest in, and this has always been true, I think, in headless, but we're certainly seeing an influx of it recently, is there are people that just want to integrate with your APIs, right? Like they don't want any of the admin, right? And all of our APIs are conform to the open API spec. They're all built in Golang. They're all super modern and super easy to understand. We're not, one of the reasons we purchased Molten is we didn't want to retrofit an old platform for sort of a modern era and then drag along all the complexity in the APIs that existed in a more monolithic platform along with it, which is what in a lot of the platforms. So all of ours are easy to consume, both from a developer point of view, but now increasingly from an AI point of view. So we're building MCP servers to enable you to call those APIs and build front ends dramatically faster. The biggest task I've given my team lately is I want to be able to spin up front ends in minutes or hours, not in days, months, or weeks, in days and months. And so we're building all of that, utilizing our componentry. I think one of the things that I'm excited about in this era, and we're calling it the intelligent commerce era, is how do we fundamentally change the risk profile of a replatform project, right? There's three long poles in it. There's front end development, back end integrations, and then data migration, data management.
Data. I was just going to
And
say data migration.
and all three of those have great solutions in the AI world. And we're pushing our development teams to really work on those and our services teams, because today it's 6 months and $1 million to do a commerce replatform project. There's no reason that can't be 6 weeks at $100,000 here in the very near future with the way AI is impacting that. And so we're building capabilities on that all the time. A little part of where my head's at is I'm a big believer in releasing early and often and developing momentum from a development point of view. And so as we look at how do we integrate AI across all of our products, we have the right foundation with a sort of composable API first architecture. Now we can build AI on top of that, and let's just start to create the momentum. It's great for our development teams from a morale point of view, but it also customers really see how fast you're moving, and that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, and to your point, I see a time in the not too distant future where the likes of the major e-procurement platforms, the Jaggers, the Coupas, the Ariebas of the world, where from the procurement side, instead of it being a 100% human mediated procurement process, that if I'm an electrical distributor, for example, or if I'm an electrical contractor and I'm buying off of a distributor, I want to be able to just upload a schematic and I want to be able to say, okay, I don't want to tell you exactly what my shopping list is. I want you to just scan the schematic and say, okay, here's all the 5,000 components that you need to deliver on this schematic or on this architectural layout. Or instead of needing to have a quantity surveyor create the buy list for a property development or something like that, can I just upload a copy of the plans to the agentic buying side of the experience, push that through to the agentic selling side of the experience, have the agent on the selling side parse the schematic or parse the blueprints and say, oh, okay, we now know that you need these. This now becomes effectively our PO, dynamically generated PO based on, because today, I would be able, as the buyer, to be able to send that kind of thing to my account manager, and then a human team would go through that and say, okay, you're going to need this, and you're going to need this, and you're going to need that. Let's generate the line items, create a quote based on those line items, send it back to the buyer, get their approval, attach the PO number to that approval, and then complete the transaction by manually keying it into an ERP, for example. And I just don't see that manual model in the B2B world lasting much longer in the agentic world. And great thing about multimodal AI is the fact that it's enabling the scanning and the interpretation and the understanding of these complex document and data types in ways that we've never witnessed before. And I can upload, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, I can upload a hyper complex 100-page PDF to ChatGPT, ask it to summarize it for me in a couple of paragraphs, and it will do. Or I can ask ChatGPT, pull out this one tiny little piece of information from this 100-page PDF, even if that piece of information comes from an embedded image in the PDF, it can understand what that image means in a similar way to what a human would. Whereas even 6 months ago, I would have had to, and what I would have done is I would have opened the PDF in Acrobat. I would have done Control F for specific keywords, tried to find in the PDF where that piece of information was, go to that section of the PDF, understand it, read it, summarize it, and then integrate it into my workflow. Now, ChatGPT does all that for me. And so I
Exactly.
think when we think about the combination of multimodal AI capabilities alongside agentic AI capabilities and effectively giving those agents superpowers with
Hmm.
the power of LLMs, that now starts to unlock use cases that were formerly impossible without AI. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And I think we have a customer that's in the hardware space, and this is what they aspire to. I'm building a 20 by 30 deck in my backyard. Give me my list of things I need to buy. And then I want to go pick it up in store, right? That is 100% the future that we see. And I think what's amazing about this and the potential is it really does change the dynamic of what does it mean to shop, right? Whether it be in a B2C or B2B context. I think the long tenured reign of digital storefronts as we think of them with a homepage and a search bar and a product landing pages, it's all going to go away. And I think this is what's exciting. And I think the opportunity why we're excited about, honestly, about B2B is we think that's a place that's worth going to. And we have the foundational elements that can enable that sort of multimodal AI and agentic buying experiences very quickly.
It's an exciting time. I think people are simultaneously terrified. And even for me, who's seen many technical revolutions in the commerce
Sure.
world over the last 25 years, and I'm a massive tech early adopter. I do probably 90% plus of my buying for anything in life online now, and I have done for many years. I really just don't like the physical shopping experience. I avoided it at all costs wherever I can. And so for me, I am very excited, but I'm also equally I think anybody that tries to tell you they know exactly where this is going to end up
Sure.
from even from an underlying foundational technology perspective, it seems like the whole industry is moving in the direction of MCP. But is that the final standard for agentic commerce? Who knows?
Totally.
The best technology doesn't always win, and I've used this example on the pod before: the beta versus VHS battle. Right?
Sure.
Beta was the better technology from a clarity and from a resolution perspective, and from a immersion perspective, but VHS won because it was marketed better, because it was distributed better. It became the standard, despite the fact that it probably was not the best technology available at the time. And best technology doesn't always win. And so, do I know if I was to look out 2 years, do I know exactly how the market is going to look from an agentic perspective? I don't think anybody can say that, but I think those of us that have seen enough of these patterns emerge over the years. And I think the nearest corollary to this is the massive change when mobile became the predominant viewport
Right.
almost overnight. Like the adoption
Mhm.
of mobile was so crazy and it was so fast. And all of a sudden now we had to have responsive web design. And then in the early days, there was completely separate domains, completely
Yep.
separate websites designed for mobile before the market finally figured out, no, we just need to build responsive sites and
Yeah.
they need to be adaptable for any viewport. We can't have subdomains for handheld devices, tablets, desktops. We just can't do that. And so the market eventually figures it out, but there's usually one, two, three iterations before we
Sure.
land on the final architecture of what that's going to look like. And
Sure.
so I guess what you're saying is we're trying to build for a future that isn't that is still a little fuzzy, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to create the foundational building blocks that wherever this lands, we're ready to capitalize on it.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think my experience is being in lots of startups, you're always you provide the building blocks so that way the early innovators, the people that like, I can't figure out a way to do this, so I'm going to figure it out myself. No one's solving my problem can come in and do it with you. And I think those individuals and organizations can be really powerful partners as you build a product company, which is my specialty, if you will, because you're looking for someone who has a vision for the future, right? You as the vendor have it, but you're always looking for someone who's bringing a problem to be solved that also has a vision of the future to help partner along where to find what that journey is, right? And so we're always looking for those, and we've got a couple great partner customers of ours that are doing that. But I think it's an exciting time to be in commerce with all the things that are happening in AI because it feels like there's a reinvention moment that we all get to participate in. Those are, as I said before, I have a bias towards the new. Like those are the times that get me really excited.
Yeah, and it does feel like up until recently, commerce had stagnated. It had
Totally.
become staid and boring and repetitive, for lack of a better term. And I feel like there's a new invigoration in everything to do with commerce because there are still so many question marks of what this is going to look like in 1, 2, 3 years. Speaking of that, what is like from a priority perspective in the business? There's 100 different ways you could go, but what's more important probably as the product director, so to speak, in the company is what you say no to versus what you say yes to, right? Because you can't say yes to everything. And so if we were to look out 6, 12, 18 months for you guys, what are the priorities on your radar that you really want to double and triple down on?
I think for us, it's the biggest one is this idea of intelligent commerce. I sent an AI manifesto out to the company yesterday. And for us, one of the interesting things about AI is it's all happening in such real time that the only way to experience it is to do it. Right. And so the message I sent to the company yesterday was like, you need to figure out, every one of us needs to figure out how to do this every day. There's no way around it. Right. You can't wait for the training guide to come out. You can't wait for someone else to show you how to do it. Like you just need to start trying it. Right. And that unlocks creativity and new ideas. So that's the first thing. And that's probably our biggest short-term objective. And we're doing things like AI showcases inside the company. What are you building? And a lot of them are product oriented, but they don't all have to be. I think the second biggest thing for us is how do we define what else do we need to do to deliver great B2B solutions, right? So we're spending a lot of time on things like quotations and seller assisted buying portals and some of the user engagement layers of B2B that sort of take advantage of our APIs. And we've got some great design partners in our customer base that we're working on with that. But that's a way to get really crisp on what problems we solve uniquely and exceptionally well. So that way we can facilitate our go-to-market efforts and land new customers. And then the third piece is really around how do we participate in the redefinition of what commerce is in the sort of AI intelligent commerce era, right? And you know, I'm a big believer and there's no holds barred, right? There are no sacred cows that we can't go touch, right? So why not put everything in the mix and see what's possible? And I think I get excited about the thought leadership opportunities there. And I've got a number of developers who feel that way as well. And so I'm a big believer in technical evangelism as a way to define what's possible in the market. And so we're looking to invest a lot in that area to define a more tangible landscape, right? Everybody's talking about AI. We certainly get that, but like, how do we make that real? And that's where the sort of ship early and often and BA code talks, if you will. So we're very much focused on that.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. And eating your own dog food and internally so that you can then see what shakes out to externally expose that.
Yeah.
And it also sometimes means that you may have to kill off features that are non-performative or don't see high uptake in the market, et cetera. I think having a real product development mindset here and a ruthless product development mindset so that you don't get overall code bloat forever is an
Sure.
important thing too. Yeah, super interesting. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for every single platform vendor out there because I think where historically they might have known where the puck was going and they could skate in that general direction, now it's a little bit of a free-for-all again in the commerce market in terms of where does this all shake out? We directionally maybe know where it's going to shake out, but we don't know exactly where that's going to land. And so it's keeping us all on our toes, whether you're a consultant, whether you're an SI, whether you're a platform vendor, doesn't really matter. It's keeping us all on our toes. And it's brought, as someone who's a techie at heart, this has really brought some invigoration to me. And it's exciting and fresh in new ways again, which I love. Now, if people want to reach out and get a hold of you, I'll drop a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, as well as the Elastic Path website in the show notes. But other than that, if people want to chat all things commerce with you or cover some of the topics we talked about today, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is LinkedIn. I'm very active on it. It's been a big point of emphasis for me over the last year or so. I'm easy to find and very public on LinkedIn. So that's certainly the best place.
I love it. Yeah, you've just ticked over 4,000 followers on LinkedIn. So
Exciting.
congratulations
Thank you.
on that new milestone. I think that when building a personal or professional brand, LinkedIn is a great place to do it. So congratulations on doubling down your efforts there. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, we've been chatting for over an hour now. The hour's flown by. This is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. Mr. Bryan House, the CEO of Elastic Path. What is your question for me today?
So actually, I have a question, and it's a little tactical. And based on your experience in B2B commerce, one of the battlefields that I've watched many of my previous companies and other companies go to die on is workflow and BPM. And but it's funny is I've watched companies invest an enormous amount of time and energy in workflow builders and workflow designers and all of that, and it's only to watch them never get used. But when you talk about B2B with sort of industry pundits and analysts, like workflow is super important. So I'm curious from your perspective, like what is good workflow and how important is it in B2B scenarios, commerce scenarios?
Yeah, I think that workflow builders, for lack of a better term, are probably more important in the B2B world than definitely than in the B2C and D2C world. Because we have
Sure.
in the B2C and D2C world, the buying process is so much more linear. And it's okay, we have product discovery, we have the kind of the inspiration aspiration piece, we have the add to cart piece, we have the checkout piece, we have the shipping piece, and maybe a return process, worst case scenario. In B2B, the buying process is so non-linear and it
Mhm.
is so unique to the market, the vertical, the seller, the buyer, and to their preferences of how they want to buy and how the seller can efficiently sell. And kind of no two businesses, even in the same vertical and maybe even operating in the same market, no two are the same in my experience. And they all think that their sales process is the secret sauce. They all think that their engagement model is the secret sauce. They all think that their catalog mix is the secret sauce or their pricing model is the secret sauce. So B2Bs oftentimes have a slightly overinflated opinion of themselves that they think they're real special. And in many cases, they are, but what they think differentiates them in the market or what they think makes them special or what they think has allowed them to grow to the level that they are. When I go in and I start doing customer interviews on their behalf, oftentimes they get insights that they can't get any other way
Sure. Sure.
because even if they tried to do the level of customer research that I do for them in many instances, the buyer is not willing to be as honest in the B2B world because they got to then wake up the next day and work with their account manager, Bob, Jane, whatever. They got to get back to work. And so if they're brutally honest, then sometimes they feel like that will harm the relationship. And because the B2B world is composed of typically very long term partnerships and relationships,
Sure.
they're loath to really tell the supplier what they think of them in full brutal detail, whereas someone like me can come in and I can ask the questions in a safe environment that is and anonymize that feedback and categorize it into themes and buckets that then is meaningful for the business to onboard into any new solution. And so that's what I find my role is. My role is oftentimes to shine a spotlight on the areas that actually matter to the business versus the areas they think matter to the business. Now, going one step beyond that, even the areas that we ultimately determine do matter to the business, sometimes there is complexity to those processes, right? And so I think that workflow builders in the B2B world can be super, super relevant. And I'm working on a project right now that's just about ready to go live. I'm not an agency, but I was the architect of the solution. And the this is a major, one of the largest manufacturers of belts in the United States. And the way that they sell and the way that their customers buy, they needed a very complex. It wasn't even just the checkout workflow, it was the pre-checkout workflow, but then also the checkout workflow. And they wanted to give a tremendous amount of flexibility to the customer in the way that they configured that cart for fulfillment, split shipments, back orders,
Sure.
all sorts of other things. Now, if you didn't have a workflow engine inside the platform to facilitate that, it would require a fair bit of customization in most platforms to support the level of granularity in the order management process that they wanted to extend to their customers, and also the follow-up workflows associated with back order split shipments, etc. Now, because ultimately the customer selected a platform that had a really amazing flexible workflow engine built into the platform, it made setting that up 1,000 times easier than having to customize it. It was a configuration instead of a customization. And so that's where it's scenarios like that. And not all B2Bs have that level of
Sure.
complexity in their
Sure. Sure.
processes. But for the ones that do, a workflow editor or engine or platform, whatever you want to call it, makes a world of difference, particularly when you get into the development phase.
Interesting. It's super helpful. That It's definitely one of those categories, and I've lived this before, where you can invest a ton of R&D time as a vendor, and then everyone thinks they need this complexity and these workflows, and then they get them, they don't use them, and then they strip them out, or, I mean, it's inherent in the Shopify adoption. Everybody thought they needed all these complex requirements. So it turns out we let all those go. I can use Shopify and it's the third of the price,
Yes.
And so
But then also Shopify needed to add Flow, for example. So
totally.
Shopify Flow, which is you wouldn't necessarily call it a full workflow engine, but it
Right.
certainly facilitates certain custom workflows and it allows data sharing between apps within that ecosystem that I think is really important. And Flow, although it's not you, I wouldn't say Flow is used by the majority of Shopify merchants, but for the merchants that need complex workflows, it's a really important part of that stack. And yeah, a workflow engine is probably only going to be applicable at any given point in time to circa 10% of the buying
That's
population.
that's
But
my
to those 10%,
critical.
it's really important.
Yeah. But then that sort of, and like, this is, as a product leader, this is, am I solving the needs of the 90% of the market or the 10%? That is fundamentally the question. So that's very helpful. Super, super interesting.
Listen, fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your time. Can't wait to speak to you again soon. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.